I will, just take the ones that seem to have sort of broader application for the bigger group. So I see we've got now 21 participants, and it's 8:04. So I suggest that we get started. Bon matin tout le monde. Je suis Pamela Eastfeld, la présidente de l'APASE, and I'd like to welcome you to our February PAFSO breakfast with Myriam Montrat, who is head of the Anti-Racism Secretariat at Global Affairs Canada. Before we get started, I just would like to acknowledge, as we do with all of our PAFSA hosted meetings, that this is more than 2 years now since our friend and colleague Michael Kovrig has been unjustly detained in China, and we're thinking of him and wishing that he could be here with us. Without further ado, since I know that there's going to be a lot of comments and questions, I will turn over the floor to Myriam. Those of you who've just joined will see that we don't have video, and that's because of Zoom has changed something on the settings, so I can't get the video camera going. So we've decided to just continue with an audio webinar. But just a reminder that we are recording the session so that people who aren't here can watch it. We will keep it on our private facilities, our private channel for a couple weeks, just so people who couldn't be here will have a chance to join. So be aware that that if you're staying, that you are being recorded, and people will have a chance to listen to the participants and so on later. So please use the Q&A buttons at the bottom of the webinar to pose questions, or the chat to raise comments. And at the end, if there's time, I will open the floor so that people can speak if you would like. So Myriam, please, I'll turn the floor over to you. Please go ahead. Now I will unmute Myriam. I think she's, sorry, I keep seeing that meme on Facebook saying that Zoom meetings are like a seance, it's like, are you here? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
All right, sounds like a plan. So hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. I'm very happy to be here today and to engage into a conversation with all of you. I'm gonna start by just giving you a little bit of background in terms of like what the Secretariat has been doing, where we're going, what are the plans for the future, and then we can engage into a conversation. So you all know that the murder of George Floyd created a global outcry for racial equity and justice, and brought to the front the issue of anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism and racial discrimination in Canada. We also know that the roots of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous systemic racism and racial discriminations run deep. It's a foundational aspect of our professional and personal lived experience as Black people and Indigenous employees, but also racialized groups. This is stemming from a long history of slavery, police brutality. We're talking about colonialism, oppression of Indigenous people. And if you add the notion of intersectionality to that, it becomes even more acute. So you add sexism, ableism, heterosexism, gender binarism, you name it. The situation then is a little more acute. It's actually more acute, not a little more acute. Racism can be personal, so it's about individual beliefs or prejudices, or interpersonal between individuals. It can also be institutional, so policies and practices, as well as structural, the system. And what we're trying to do is to really look at this system and try to remove barriers so that we provide opportunities and more fairness in everything that we're doing in the department. One of the first things that the Secretariat did was to hire a consultant to do an environmental scan. The environmental scan provided a snapshot of the situation in the department. So it's by no means a comprehensive diagnosis, of the department, but it gives us an idea of what are the issues in the department. Les employés qui ont été interviewés, qui ont été passés en entrevue, ont mentionné certains points, comme la culture du lieu du travail n'est pas bonne, c'est une culture qui exige l'autonomie. Il n'y a pas de soutien aux employés racialisés pour la progression de leur carrière et leur promotion. Il y a une crainte de soulever des questions de racisme anti-noir ou anti-autochtone. Les occasions de postes intérimaires ne sont pas fréquentes pour le personnel autochtone ou racialisé. Lorsque vous partez en mission, les gens changent tous les 3 ans environ. Qui décide de ces emplois? Les affectations sont laissées à la discrétion de la direction. La majorité des cadres sont blancs. Qui vont-ils choisir? And over the course of the summer, there were also many exchanges that took place between employees and the deputy ministers, and exchanges within different groups. And what surfaced as a result of that in terms of the lived experience of employee within and outside the work are things like being stopped by the police and having to fear that even if you follow all the directions, you can still be hurt or even die because of police brutality, being followed around in stores because you look suspicious, having your indigenous language, culture stripped away and being forced into assimilation, being told you have to prove your indigenous blood in order to access support for the government, feeling like you have to hide parts of your culture to be accepted, having to work twice as hard to get half the recognition of your white counterparts. Now, these are not by no means generalization. This is just like how people are feeling, and it is important to acknowledge that. So the Secretariat was created in September 14th. Mandate of the Secretariat is to lead the work on addressing systemic racism and discrimination in the department. We do provide strategic advice and recommendation to the deputy ministers on how best to address issues that are pertaining to systemic racism, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and issues that are pertaining to racialized groups as well. It's about coordinating the actions of the department so that we can reach full inclusion and representation at all levels. We also are looking at developing and implementing concrete measures towards meaningful and sustainable culture change within the department, and I will be speaking to that shortly. And then we will also be responsible for coordinating meetings of the Deputy Minister Advisory Committee on Anti-Racism. So the pillars, you all know that we have 3 pillars: representation at all levels, career development, and then anti-racist values, principles, and training. When it comes to the representation at all levels, we know that Black, Indigenous, and other racialized colleagues are underrepresented in senior management positions, and also in what we call the pipeline, so EX-1, EX-2. The majority of racialized people, Black, Indigenous people, are concentrated at the more junior level or middle level. So that's something that we need to address as a department. On career development, we're aware of the informal networks, the lack of career opportunities, namely stretch assignment, actings, promotion. And then if you add to that unconscious or even conscious biases, it has a negative effect on the career development of the groups that I've mentioned. Systemic racism and discrimination is present and contribute to the issues that we've been seeing and the lack of advancement within the department for Black, Indigenous, racialized groups. It perpetuates old ideas that are sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious, sometimes systemic, and sometimes structural, as I mentioned at the beginning. And that undermines and negates the importance of diversity and inclusion. Anti-racism training is important, but it's not the solution. So if you do just training, you're not going to get where you want to be as a department. So it's a combination of, as I mentioned, ensuring representation, ensuring career development, and having the training in addition to that. But with all of that, we're also very mindful of the fact that leadership accountability is paramount. We need strong commitments. We need results. The idea is to make Global Affairs Canada an inclusive organization at home and abroad that truly reflects Canada's culturally diverse society. We want an environment where everybody can thrive and reach their full potential. So that's something that we're keeping in mind when we're doing the work that we're doing. In addition to that, you have seen that there's been lots of development currently. The clerk has released this call to action. We also have seen the release of the new supplementary mandate letters that are focusing on issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, and representation. The Treasury Board President has also provided its priority via a press release, where he's speaking to the importance of representation in the senior ranks. He's speaking to the fact that you need to factor in disaggregated data, which is an important component, and also that we need to review the Employment Equity Act and the Public Service Employment Act, in addition to training and awareness. I had the privilege of talking to the clerk about a couple of months ago, and one of the things that he mentioned was that Best Fit was not a great policy for racialized groups and Indigenous people, because for many it meant I will go with what I'm comfortable with, and it did reinforce systemic barriers and biases. He also provided some directions in terms of DM commitments when it comes to increasing representation, having some targets, considering that the workforce availability statistics are at the floor, so that we need to set some ambitious targets when it comes to representation. He's also mentioned that the education and training component is important, but again, it's about thoughtful acceleration to ensure that we are truly representatives at all levels within the public service. So with that being said, let me turn very quickly to what the Secretariat has been doing. So we looked at a framework. So we have the three pillars that I've mentioned: representation at all levels, career development, anti-racist values, principles, and training. And we also looked at the approach. So for the approach, we also have three components. The first one is equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. So we want to ensure that everything that we are doing, we apply an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. So be it in the staffing processes, the practices, and the HR branch is already looking into that to ensure that they're reviewing all their policies, practices, so that they can take into account the notion of equity, diversity, and inclusion. The second piece around the approach is evidence-based. Puis j'ai mentionné tout à l'heure que les données désagrégées sont importantes, mais il faut aussi regarder à toute la notion d'intersectionnalité, parce que comme j'ai mentionné tout à l'heure, on est très conscient du fait que quand on rajoute d'autres composantes, ça complexifie, mais ça rajoute aux barrières auxquelles font face les groupes qui sont plus marginalisés. Et qui sont affectés de façon disproportionnée. Donc, ça, c'est une autre composante importante. Et puis, la notion d'avoir des cibles pour être en mesure de voir si on est capable d'atteindre les résultats qu'on s'est fixés, que ce soit en termes de représentation ou en termes de formation, par exemple. Et puis finalement, le troisième élément de l'approche, c'est la gouvernance et le partenariat. Donc, l'idée, c'est de travailler tous ensemble pour l'excellence. Et de là, l'importance des comités à l'interne, que ce soit les comités corporatifs, exco, les comités qu'on a à l'interne, le conseil de diversité et d'inclusion, et aussi le DM Advisory Committee on Anti-Racism. I switched to English. Et puis, on a aussi les partenaires externes, donc les autres ministères, le bureau de la dirigeante principale en ressources humaines, le conseil privé, l'APEX, avec qui on travaille de très, très proche, mais aussi les autres secrétariats. Donc, au niveau de la représentation, on est en train de regarder à être clair sur où les lacunes se situent et qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire pour régler ces lacunes à l'intérieur du ministère. La notion de pouvoir établir des cibles claires pour le ministère au niveau de la représentation, considérer des actions de dotation ciblées pour justement régler les lacunes qu'on aura identifiées. S'assurer que toutes les actions de dotation, que ce soit les affectations, toutes ces décisions, les non annoncés, les concours non annoncés, qu'il n'y ait aucune décision qui soit prise sans prendre en considération les objectifs de représentation du ministère. Et on est aussi en train de regarder à ce qu'on soit en mesure de revoir les processus, en tout cas, pas de les revoir nécessairement, mais de s'assurer que les processus de recrutement post-secondaire génèrent assez de masse critique pour qu'on soit capable de voir les gens progresser dans leur carrière et puis qu'on ait suffisamment de personnes dans les échelons inférieurs qui puissent monter pour alimenter les échelons supérieurs. When it comes to career development, we're looking at the notion of mentorship plus. So GAC is a pilot department along with 3 other departments, DFO, TBS, and IRCC. So we're considering doing, we're currently looking at a mentorship plus program to support Black, Indigenous employees and other racialized groups within the department. So the pilot will be incremental and we'll see from the lessons learned how we can expand that pilot. The other element is to look at the notion of official languages. We know that language can be a barrier for many of the racialized Indigenous and Black people. So something that we're considering as part of the plan for the organization. And finally, the notion of career development programs. So identifying appropriate career development programs and seeing how they can be eventually customized to support the development of our employees. On the front of anti-racism, anti-racist values, principles, and training, leading to culture change, because this is what we want culture change. We are looking at the notion of having a coaching program for managers to support them in their anti-racism efforts, plans, and activities. We also looking at the training piece, and you've seen that the training has been released for executives. The next iteration is online training for all of the employees. And we're working on a baseline survey. And the idea is for us to have a point of reference from which we can actually assess whether or not the department is moving in the right directions when it comes to culture change. I did mention that leadership accountability is critical. So the PMAs are important, the disaggregated data, because the disaggregated data will help us get a better picture of what's going on in the department. We're also looking at EDI plans for all branches and missions. So ensuring that branches and missions can develop their own EDI plans that do align with the departmental larger objectives. And we also want to make sure that we have ongoing discussions at Exco on these issues, so that like we can measure whether or not we're making progress as a department. All of these activities, of course, we will need to assess the activities that we will do in year one and the one that will be going to year two and so forth, because the idea there is that we also want to be mindful of the ability to deliver on those. And we want to ensure that we have the adequate resourcing to do them. And we want them to be sequential. There's no way that we can do everything all at once. So we want to be very deliberate and look at the places where we can have the most impact, especially on year one. So with that being said, I think I will open it for the discussion portion. So over to you, Pam.
Okay, thank you very much, Myriam. This is really interesting. And, you know, I have to say, I mean, I've been in FS for a long time, since December 1993. And I know that there is tons to do, but I have to say that, you know, the creation of your secretariat and the stuff that has been happening in the last, you know, 8 months or so.
5 months.
5 months. This represents, you know, a lot more movement than I've seen in 27 years. So, while that's kind of an indictment itself, I mean, I think that, you know, it is positive that things are happening. And I have two related questions that came in. One of them is noting that HR is reviewing its practices for diversity, inclusion, and equality in GAC staffing. How is this happening? I mean, are there consultants? The person's concerned that in-house likely can't do this work on their own, given their own systemic issues and lack of expertise, frankly. And someone else is asking specifically about the recent FS competitions, FS3 and FS1 that are just concluding, and the FS2 competition that's currently in process, and asking at what point, if any, are employment equity factors considered during these competitions. There was also the recent, fairly recent EX1 that just came to a conclusion. And I noted that they did seem to apply those factors right at the end, when, you know, people had to be either a member of an equity seeking group or meet all of the asset criteria to get on the list. So, you know, that was positive. I think personally, I would have liked to have seen that being clearer up front. I think it would have probably encouraged some applicants and, you know, perhaps manage some of the expectations of the others. I noted that D&D yesterday just launched an EX1 competition, and they are specifically seeking members of equity seeking groups. So I think that is, you know, that's really something. And yeah, and someone else is commenting, clerk's call to action places first and foremost the appointment of BIPOC to and within the EX group. What will this look like, and will there be specific processes to deliver on this? Remember a visible minority process some time ago. So yeah, so related to what D&D is doing. So I'm hoping maybe you can comment on that issue, those issues in general. Small issues, you know.
Absolutely, small issues. So when it comes to the specificities of HR, I will not actually comment, because it's really within the purview of Francis. But what I can tell you for sure is that my conversation with Francis has been very clear that they're really looking at bringing in some external expertise to review the practices and ensuring that they do apply that equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. I know that they've already started that process. You're absolutely right. Like from talking to HCM and others, they're trying to ensure that they bring more and more that notion of equity, diversity, and inclusion in everything that it is that they're doing. So case in point, like you mentioned, of like what has happened with the EX1, but we're also mindful of the fact that there is still much more to be done. This is only the beginning, we're starting to get to the place where we're supposed to be. But it's going to take a little time because if you're looking at reviewing the processes and ensuring that they're debiased, ensuring that whenever you have a selection board, for instance, that you have representation on the board, so that you remove some of the biases that can be intrinsically in the system. When we're talking about systemic racism, we're talking about a system that goes back centuries. So of course, it's not something that you can tackle overnight. But what I've been saying as well is that we need to start developing that muscle, the muscle whereby EDI is at the forefront, and everything that we're doing, we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion. When it comes to the question about the call to action and the clerk mentioning the appointment of BIPOC to and within the X group, again, that's something that has been discussed. It's very clear that there are issues when it comes to representation at the EX level at GAC. The disaggregated data that we've received is showing that there are less than 5 Black people that are part of the executive cadre, about 15 people that are Indigenous, and then person with disabilities, there are significant gaps as well. So these are the 3 groups that should be tackled in terms of representation, and it may take different forms. I did mention the notion of sponsorship, and the fact that we are part of the pilot, so we're going to look seriously as to what are the parameters of the program to ensure that we can put in place a process that is just equitable, but that also allows members of those groups to benefit from the sponsorship. The details of what it will look like, I don't have as of yet, just because we're just starting to put those parameters together. The good side of that particular program is that OCRO was leading, and they have hired a consultant that has done a significant amount of work in terms of what the program should look like, what are the parameters, how do we select the people that will be part of the sponsorship program, and in all of that, how do we ensure that we provide the right support to employees so that they can progress in their career.
Excellent. No, thank you. Yeah, I can hear that there's definitely progress, but definitely a lot to do. Questions come in asking, saying that the VM, visible minority category, is very broad. Will there be in the future a greater focus on BIPOCs and also on intersectionality?
So intersectionality is always at the forefront as well, because we know that you cannot just people are complex. The issue is that we need to look at the most pressing matters that needs to be addressed, and there are so many of them. So we need to prioritize, but that's not to say that we are not going to get at those issues. The notion of intersectionality, this is something that I've been discussing as well with HR branch in terms of the disaggregated data. And we're looking for now at some information, such as, for instance, how long are people staying at level? When you look at the different occupational categories, where are people situated within, like, I mean, the scale? Are they more at the bottom, or are they more like in the middle, or are they more like, I mean, at the top of the scale? So, and then also looking at the representation, how many heads of missions are members of the BIPOC, the BIPOC groups? So how many represents like indigenous, Black, racialized groups? So you can see that already just doing all of that like will take some time. And then we talked about like adding intersectionality to that. So they're aware of that. It's part of their plan. How fast they will get at all of that, well, your guess is as good as mine. We need to ensure that we can move at a steady pace, nevertheless. And when it comes to disaggregation as well, like we need to look at like what are the needs, and how can we get at the disaggregated level that are required. For the time being, we know that the clerk has identified like, I mean, 3 groups, and it's indigenous, Black person with disabilities, and racialized groups. So we're very mindful of ensuring again that we can identify where the gaps are at GAC, and that's the first thing, and that we can address like, I mean, those gaps right away. And then we can look at like, I mean, a longer term strategy. So which will include like, what are the targets that we want to set for the future? Because one of the things that we know is that the population is increasing very fast on the side of visible minority, on the side of like indigenous people, on the side of Black people. And we don't want to be caught like, I mean, in 5 years, 10 years from now, where we can say, oh my God, we're still in the process of having to catch up. So we need to put a strategy that will help us as a department to maintain representation once we get it, and that we have the enough of a critical mass in the pipeline so that we can feed the different levels without difficulty. And it is important like for people to be able like to see themselves in the organization at all levels. And it's like, I mean, the pillars that says representation at all levels.
Yeah, no, that definitely that makes a lot of sense. I guess, you know, one of the questions I have is we see this often that, you know, there'll be recruitment to different levels, and, you know, certainly recruitment at the entry level of, you know, a more sort of balanced and representative group of people, but then people don't stay. You know, it often seems that people leave, and, you know, I'm sure that, you know, the systemic issues and the you know, the aggression, microaggressions and things that people face are part of what makes them leave. Is this something that your group is looking to address as well, like the retention issues? You know, how we can make the environment more friendly and accepting for people to stick around at Global Affairs, and, you know, in the Foreign Service in particular.
We definitely spoke about, like, I mean, the notion of retention, which is like an interesting question, Pam, because one of the things that I heard when I joined the department was GAC is so popular that you have people that are waiting and knocking at the door, which can be a good thing and a bad thing, because then we put less attention on the need to retain people. And I think that's a disservice to the department, because you're losing expertise, you're losing corporate memory, you're losing people that actually know the department really well. So absolutely, it's important like to have a strategy around retention. We've discussed that like with several of the branches. Yesterday, I was actually speaking to one of the ADM in that regard, and we did raise like the issue of retention. And also looking at like term employees, and then what it is that we want to do in terms of like, I mean, young people, and ensuring that they have a career in this department. So these are elements that, again, fall within the purview of HCM. And these are discussions that they're having as well in terms of like ensuring that we'll look at all the different aspects, not just like recruitment, but also retention, and also the rate of separation of employees, right? It's because the department is so popular. We may not see like a rate that is like as big as in other departments, but nevertheless, you need like to take into consideration all these aspects if you want to have a more fulsome strategy.
No, fair enough. Yeah, it's demoralizing when sometimes I've seen groups of new people recruited, and thought, this is good. This seems like a more representative group. And then, you realize as 5 years later, a lot of times most of the people are not here. So I think that's something where we as a union, as a professional association can help, So I'm definitely open to hearing from you and from everybody else about ways that PAFSO could in particular help to move the needle on these things. Someone has asked, assignments lead to acquisition of competencies with a capital C, which lead to promotions with a capital P. How will HFP increase diversity during this part of the pipeline that you mentioned? And just to be clear to everybody, I mean, Myriam is not HFP, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'll set the table for you that way.
Excellent, because I was gonna say that is a question for HFP. What we do as part of the Secretariat, as I mentioned, we provide advice like to the deputy ministers. I'm in contact with like Francis as well, and then I have discussion with him and with members of his team in terms of like elements that should be considered. But when it comes like to the implementations and how things are being done, that's really a question for HR branch. We try to influence, but as I say, like my main role is to provide advice to the deputy ministers, develop like a strategy for the department that has like, clarity in terms of like what it is that we're trying to do, but I'm not the implementer. So I want to be very clear about that. Implementation will occur on the side of like HR branch. The different ADMs and branches and missions will implement as well. So when it comes like to these type of like very pointed questions, these are questions that will be best answered by HR branch.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see that you are in a similar role to the one I'm in as, as co-champion for psychological well-being, for example, where, part of your job our job is to bring perspectives to the table that might not come to them otherwise. But we also have to be quite careful about not overstepping our bounds and just annoying
Exactly.
the people who will be the ones to implement these things, right? Otherwise then we lose that audience that is the area that we can that gives us our influence.
Absolutely.
So sort of related to that, I see there's another question from Lori saying, much of the focus seems to be on internal competitions, which certainly needed to be the first order of business, but is part of the mandate for the Secretariat to look at issues related to how the department does business while ensuring diversity and inclusion, for example, contracting for services, provision of client services like in trade and consular, et cetera. And from what you're saying, I think the answer for you particularly is no, but if you have comments on that, then I think we would love to hear them. So Lori's saying not just competitions, just internal issues, but Myriam deals with HR and staffing competition issues.
So no, I'll reframe that. So again, I'm looking at like the strategy for the department overall in terms of addressing systemic barriers, and then looking at issues of like racial discrimination, ending systemic racism, and so forth. So not specifically on HR. HR is like one part of the equation. because if I go back to the pillars that I've mentioned, we're looking at the notion of representation. So absolutely something that falls like right within the purview of HR, but we're looking at career development. So CFSI is part of like, I mean, that process as well when it comes like to training. And then like, I mean, there are pieces that, I mean, will be led by the Secretariat, such as like, I mean, the survey and the pilot of the sponsorship program, mentorship plus, it is called. So in terms of like what our focus is, as I've mentioned at the beginning, like, I mean, different elements, but the main focus is really the advice like to the deputy ministers, and also the DM advisory committee will be part of the equation. So, and I spend a lot of time, like, I mean, speaking to all the key players in the department so that we can ensure that that strategy like is making sense, that it's doable, that we agree on like what are the resource requirements in order like to put that strategy together. So what we've done is we put together like a framework in order to have clarity as to where the department should be going. So it's a guiding piece. The next steps for us is to develop like the strategic plan for the department with clear action plan for year 1 and year 2. When it comes like to those 3 different pillars, and as I mentioned, taking into account leadership accountability as well. To answer your question, Laurie, yes, we are internal focused, so not external focused. So my role is to look at like what can be done to address the issues that have been identified when it comes like to representation, the notion of systemic racism. We also are very mindful of the mental health of employees in all of that. So working closely with Roxane Dubé and her team, because we know that like in a context within which we're operating right now with the pandemic, in addition to having to face like issues where like you feel that you've been discriminated or that you didn't get that assignment, and then you're not certain what was the rationale behind that, or that you face like instances of racism within the workplace. All this stuff like can have an impact on the mental health of employees. So the focus is what can we do to improve to end systemic racism within the department, and to ensure that we're removing barriers so that employees can actually, we can level the playing field for everyone. And this is, when I say internal here at headquarters, internal in missions as well. But yeah, the focus of the Secretariat is internal. And we work very closely with the other Secretariat. There are 3 other Secretariats that are advanced, IRCC, Justice, and DND. So we work very closely with those 3. And as I'm speaking, there are new task force working groups that are being created in other departments to do work that is similar to what it is that we're trying to do at GAP.
Thank you. No, that's good to know that that there are other secretariats out there, and that there is one in particular at IRCC where we have a number of our FS immigration stream is working out of IRCC. So maybe we will try to get your counterpart there here to talk about us for a future PAFSO breakfast. That would be that would probably be of interest. I see there's a couple more questions that have come in. One of them is many missions have established DEI councils, and does the Secretariat have a role with those in terms of governance and housing best practices?
So absolutely, this is in the plan, because you also have within branches, focal points or people that are taking the lead with respect to developing the EDI plans and implementing them. So the idea will be more or less like having a way in which we can coordinate and then meet on a regular basis so that we can see how things are evolving and how the plans are fitting into the larger plan. So the accountability piece is an important one. So and hence the reason of like, I mean, ensuring that like we can see where the plans are going, and then if there are things that we can do to support the different branches and missions as they develop and as they implement their plan. And it's like the notion of like having coaches that can assist as well. Ultimately, as I say, this is a department plan. This is the plan of the deputy ministers. So, and hence the reason why like we're ensuring that like everybody's engaged and that we're moving in the right directions in that regard. So definitely part of the plan, like to have like some sorts of like coordinating integration element so that we can make sure that we know where people are going with their plans. And as I mentioned, like how does that fit into the larger picture?
Oh, thank you. I think that would be really useful to people, because right now there's a kind of there's a lot of enthusiasm, I think, but it's hard to get a sense of where to start, and sharing some best practices and some common approaches, I think would be very useful to especially in some of our missions abroad and regional offices where they don't always have access to to sessions like this, or they don't have easy access to you. And now that we're all working remotely, I think that that would be very, very welcome. Someone has asked, great to hear anti-racism training is being rolled out, but what strategies are being explored to increase accountability among managers in particular? For example, implementing 360-degree reviews. So I think you answered a little bit of that when you spoke about managers' PMAs, but is there anything else that is happening to increase accountability?
So the accountability piece again, like, is an important portion when it comes to training, and I have had a discussion with CFSI on that because we want to make sure that it's not just about taking the training, but it's also what's the impact of the training. So in that regard, well, first of all, we want to ensure that people are taking the training. Among the executive cadre, the deputy minister DMA has been like very clear that this is an expectations of all EXs that they will take the training. The other piece for me that was really nice to see is that as I'm talking to different ADMs in terms of their plans, yesterday again, like one of the ADM was very clear at his management table that they had reached a certain percentage of people that have registered for the course, but that they want to ensure that like people are actually taking the course. So urging the rest of the members to actually register for the course, which was really nice. So to answer the question around 360 degree, that's a good suggestion. As I mentioned, CFSI and we have had several conversations in that regard. They're aware of the fact that it's not just about taking the training, it's also about the impact the training is having, and ensuring that we see a difference, because that will assist as well when we get to measuring how we are doing in terms of the culture change within the department. So they're looking into that, and I will be pleased to mention the notion of maybe them considering a 360 degree. I think that's a great idea.
I think that would really change the environment in the department quite a lot if there were real 360 degree performance evaluations. Yeah, we won't belabor that point necessarily, but I think that would change a lot of practices. I see there's another question from Abdurrahman. He says, thanks for organizing the session. You're welcome. My pleasure. And to you, Myriam, for joining. And he's asking, how, you mentioned how official languages, you mentioned that how official languages are used could potentially change. Could you please expand on that? Or are we talking about competition and selection processes?
Okay, so what I mentioned is that we're looking at official language training as part of the equation. So the idea there is we just want to ensure that people have the language training that they require in order to do their job, but also to be prepared like for competitive processes. So whether this is going to be something that is the responsibility of the different branches is one thing, or whether we go with something that is more centralized, this is something that remains like to be decided upon. But what I'm saying is that as part of that guiding piece and reference framework that we've developed, we're putting like official language as being like an important component of the strategy moving forward.
Thanks. And you and I have had a couple of discussions about the impact of official languages requirements on competitions and so on, and have talked about approaching HR, and PAFSO has done so to say, look, in these competitions, like particularly say the FS3 competition, where people have been through a very long process. And then, you get a group of qualified candidates who have been through, met all the requirements, but, they're just short of being able to get their levels for official languages. Perhaps really, a little bit of training money could be found to give those candidates a bit of training and give them a chance to meet that requirement before, the competition is closed and everybody has to start over. Because what I find is that often, we have these discussions, and this is not the first time this has come up, but the problem is that the competitions, despite, HR's best intentions, the competitions seem to only run like at best every 5 years or so. So you raise the issue during a current competition and they say, oh yes, of course, we will do this next time. And then next time happens and it's 5 years later and oh, there's some reason that it can't be done this time. So before you know it, you've gone like these are people who have gone 7 years without the chance of a promotion. So what I'm pushing them for right now is to say, look, like, let's not mess around with this. Like, you've got a competition going. You're going to be able to identify a list of people in the groups that you want to address in particular. And, like they find money for all kinds of other ridiculous things. I really don't see why they can't find a little bit of money to address that. But that leads me to a slightly delicate issue. I see we don't have any open questions. I mean, there have been a few lively discussions among the FS group. People who are on our Facebook group will see it, where on these subjects of where there are, kind of competing interests and competing equity issues that need to be addressed. Like, the environment for Francophones in global affairs and government in general, the working environment it's frankly not fair. I can get away as an Anglophone with a solid niveau C. I can get away with not using French for large stretches in GAC, whereas a Francophone really cannot get away without using English. It's just not practical. And so, you have people who have made the effort to be, who are truly bilingual, who've, really made the effort to get their levels, and they come along and say, well, this should be a hard requirement for everyone, and it should, it should be enforced. But at the same time, we know that, that requirement can be a barrier to representation of other groups. And how, I mean, I'm just trying to think, for PAFSO in particular, but for GAC and for all of us, I see on the list of participants, there are quite a few managers, deputy directors, and even a couple of EXs. I mean, how should we, what could we be doing to reconcile this and to help that situation?
So there's work that is being done currently. There is a group that is being led by Chris Morin to look at the situation of like the use of the French language within the department. And the group is supposedly to provide some recommendations in that regard. I'm part of the group as well, in terms of looking at the use of the language and what can be done like to ensure that there is more balance that is brought forward. So hopefully that group like will bring like some of like, I mean, reestablish some more of that equilibrium that is definitely required when it comes like to the use of the French and the English language within the department.
Okay, that's good to know. I heard that there was a group, but I wasn't sure who was in charge of it. So maybe I will try to get him to come for a PAFSO breakfast as well. I just have my eye on the clock and I see that it's 8:59. So the official time for these sessions is an hour, and officially, if you leave at 9 o'clock, nobody is being rude. But I mean, I do have a little bit more time, Myriam. I don't know if you do, if there are any last questions that people
Yeah, I
would.
can take one more question, but unfortunately after that I have to run because like I have like something that is starting at 9:15. So
Okay, you have a day job and work to do. I think we understand, and we really appreciate the time that you've taken with us first thing in the morning like this.
my pleasure.
Oh, it's really been, I really appreciate it. It's been a very good discussion, and I really appreciate your frankness. I'm not seeing any hands, so maybe I will take advantage of being the chair to ask two questions. One, which is just in general, I'm wondering if you have seen an impact of the work from home remote environment, the COVID environment that we're all in, if you have seen an impact of that on the issues that you're addressing. And then finally, do you have any requests or suggestions for us as PAFSO, as the FS group, the FS community, for things that we could be doing to make the situation better for racialized, for BIPOC people in global affairs and in the Foreign Service?
So as far as working remotely is concerned, I know that it can be difficult for some, but when it comes to the work that we're doing in the Secretariat, that hasn't impacted us like that much. We're able, like, I mean, to move the different pieces of the agenda forward. When there's a need like to have like some particular meetings because like it's important like to see each other, we have the ability to do that, but I can tell you that like it wasn't really required per se. We're able like to get by, like, I mean, by using the technology and advancing, and even like with the meetings that we have externally, it's working well. This is not to say that like COVID is not taking a toll on people and that we're missing the human connection. Instead of doing it like through the screen or right now, like, I mean, just hearing your voices and not seeing your faces. But it's a new way of doing business, and we're all trying to adapt in that regard. So not much change in terms of our ability to do the job. I will say maybe the drawback is that you're on the screen a lot, and then you no longer have that distinction about like work and home and life balance. I don't like to say work-life balance because life is work and life is your family and private. Everything is like mingled in all of that. So if you're in the office, at one point you stop, you get in your car or you get in your bus or you take your walk and you go home. When you work from home, that distinction is not that clear anymore. So you end up like, I mean, really extending and overstretching. So I will say this is the place where we all need to be careful and to take those mental breaks in order like to rejuvenate and then to just replenish even for 5 or 10 minutes before like continuing and not being on the screen.
Yeah, I think we all have to be careful to make sure that we're working from home and not living at work, right?
Exactly, absolutely.
You know?
So that's important. It's like it's that ability of like compartmentalizing. On the side of what you can do as PAFSO, I think that we all in it together. It's a collective responsibility. We all need like to be mindful of what we are trying to do in terms of removing barriers and in terms of trying like to end like some of the systemic issues within the public service and within the department. So I think we all have a role to play, and we all have to remember that by addressing issues for some of the groups that have been disproportionately affected by systemic racism, at the end of the day, it benefits everyone. Because when you address issues like for the ones that are the most affected, by default, the barriers that you're removing will benefit the whole. So I think we all have a role to play, and I'm counting on everyone like to do their part.
Thank you very much. So specifically, is there anything that we as PAFSO can do to support you and your team? I mean, we've talked a little bit about some of the shared things, and you know, I also have this this hat as a psychological well-being co-champion. Yep. But is there anything specific that you would like to see us do?
Not that I can think of, but I think like, I mean, in your role in terms of like what we've discussed, like on the psychological side, and then like, I mean, helping push the agenda to ensure that we keep those issues at the forefront is also an important component. So absolutely.
Excellent. And just our executive vice president, John Gossel, is also the chair of the Visible Minorities Network. So that gives us a little bit of influence on at that level as well. Although, you know, sometimes we also have to make sure that we don't get ourselves into a conflict on some of these things. You know, I have to be careful as with my psychological well-being hat, not to you know, be too much of an FS. No, not to seem like I'm working for PAFSO rather than working for all employees in that. But you know, luckily, I don't think that there is much of a conflict really. But if there are no other questions, it's now 9:06, and Myriam, we've taken more of your time than you know than we asked you for. So I really appreciate you taking the time with us. I appreciate everyone else coming out and asking these great questions and engaging in a lively discussion and putting up with the lack of video. I'm going to try and figure that out as soon as I leave so it doesn't happen the next time. Everyone, next time, our next breakfast will be again on the second Tuesday of the month in March. And our speaker will be Michael Salmon of Lumina Consulting, who's going to talk about leadership in the workplace, both at, you know, from the management or supervisory perspective, but also at the personal level. And I think he's also going to be able to address some of the issues that we talked about today, and how, you know, everyone can, even if you don't have formal management responsibilities, take the lead in setting an environment and helping to create a safe and inclusive workplace for everyone. So merci beaucoup tout le monde, and à la prochaine. And merci beaucoup, Myriam. I really appreciate it.
Bye, my pleasure. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.